I wasn't looking for healing temples when I started this. I was researching urban anomalies in older cities, the kind of infrastructure oddities that tend to get filed away under architectural curiosity and forgotten, the kind of thing that doesn't trouble you until it accumulates. And then I found the photograph, not of a ruin in some remote wilderness, not of something excavated carefully over decades with teams of archaeologists. A photograph taken beneath the streets of an English city in 1878 showing a bath. A Roman bath, perfectly preserved, buried under 1,500 years of city and silence. Nobody had known it was there. The city had been built directly on top of it. That's when the official explanations began to feel insufficient, because the Roman baths at Bath weren't just an archaeological curiosity. They were a fully operational healing complex, a sophisticated network of mineral pools and thermal chambers and ceremonial spaces. And they sat underground undiscovered until 1755. Not lost in a wilderness, not buried under volcanic ash on some remote coast. Buried under a functioning English city right beneath the streets that people had been walking every single day for centuries. The bath complex had been there the entire time, sealed beneath the ground while empires rose and fell directly on top of it. A healing temple hidden beneath a modern city, and nobody looked down. The Romans called the place Aquae Sulis, the waters of Sulis. Before them, the Celts had already recognized something exceptional about this site, had already built a shrine there, had already understood that the water rising from this particular ground had properties worth treating as sacred. The spring produces more than 300,000 gallons of mineral water every single day at temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It hasn't stopped. It was running before the Romans arrived, running while the complex sat buried in darkness for over a millennium, running now. Whatever existed beneath Bath wasn't going anywhere. When Roman engineers built over the springs, they didn't just construct baths, they built a temple. A formal temple to Sulis-Minerva, goddess of healing waters, positioned directly alongside the bathing complex. This wasn't incidental, this was the point. The healing and the sacred were the same thing, occupying the same space, serving the same purpose, and then it was buried, and then it was forgotten. This raises a simple but critical question. How do you forget something like that? The Romans weren't operating some minor regional peculiarity at Bath. At the height of the empire, thousands of bath complexes existed across its territories. Thousands, in every province, every significant city, every garrison settlement worth maintaining. These weren't secondary amenities, not the way we might think of a public pool. They were the center of civic life. Physicians operated out of them. Politicians conducted business there. The larger complexes featured architecture that rivaled anything built in Rome itself. Domed halls and underfloor heating systems and sequences of rooms calibrated to move the human body through precise thermal protocols that ancient physicians understood as medicine. The progression was deliberate treatment. You entered the tepidarium first, the warm room, to gradually raise the body's temperature and open the skin. Then the caldarium, the hot room with its intense wet heat, said to draw inflammation from deep tissue and relieve the lungs through heavy, humid air. Then cold water immersion to stimulate circulation and close the skin again. This wasn't superstition dressed up in architecture. Ancient physicians who designed and refined these protocols observed consistent results across enormous patient populations over centuries. They lacked germ theory, yes. What they had was something almost more powerful, generations of careful empirical observation about what specific mineral water and specific temperatures actually did to specific conditions in actual human bodies. Observations refined and transmitted and built upon across hundreds of years of continuous practice. And here's the strangest part. These complexes weren't built wherever it was convenient. Many were built directly over mineral springs, not any water, specific water, sulfurous springs for skin conditions and respiratory complaints, calcium-rich springs credited with easing bones and joints, iron-bearing springs associated with fatigue and weakness. The ancients didn't want hot water. They identified particular locations where the water itself carried compounds that produced observable results, where patients emerged from repeated immersion with inflammation reduced, with conditions that had resisted other treatments responding. They built their healing temples at those exact locations. The architecture was the delivery system. Ancient Greek physicians had been documenting the therapeutic properties of sulfurous springs generations before Rome. The Homeric texts reference restorative baths. Hesiod mentions them. Specific observations, specific conditions, results consistent enough to be codified and taught across time. This wasn't mysticism. There were actual mechanisms operating in that water, mineral compositions and temperatures and chemical interactions with human tissue that we can now measure with precision. The ancients observed the effects for centuries before they had language for the chemistry. So why did it end? The official explanation is disease. By the 16th century, the great European bathhouses were closing. Erasmus wrote about it in 1526 with what reads now as genuine bafflement. 25 years ago, he noted, nothing was more fashionable in Brabant than the public baths. And now there are none. Plague, syphilis, fear of contagion. The medical consensus shifted from bathing promotes health to bathing opens you to infection. The baths closed. But the deeper I went into this explanation, the more it began to crack. Because the timing is wrong. Erasmus was writing in 1526. The medical consensus he was describing, that bathing spread disease, would not be scientifically tested or verified for another 350 years. Germ theory didn't solidify until the 1880s. What Erasmus was documenting wasn't the adoption of an improved medical understanding. It was the adoption of a fear, a recommendation with no confirmed mechanism behind it. Avoid the baths. Don't ask why. Just don't go. The official explanation collapses here because it requires us to believe that a practice embedded in civic life across 2,000 years of continuous use, backed by centuries of observed medical benefit, the literal center of social and political life in every major civilization it touched, was abandoned based on a suspicion, not a discovery, not a documented mechanism, a feeling that the water might be spreading something, and it worked. Within a generation, across multiple countries that were otherwise rivals and enemies, the baths closed, simultaneously. The silence was deafening. No formal investigation into whether the therapeutic properties the ancient physicians had cataloged were real. No effort to preserve the mineral spring sites that had been identified over centuries as producing medicinal water. No documentation of what was being abandoned, just closure, and then burial. Because the physical structures didn't simply fall into disuse, they went underground, not metaphorically, literally underground. Streets were raised above them. New construction went directly over them. The ground level of the ancient world dropped below the ground level of the new world, and the baths sank with it. This appears in city after city. Bath is the most famous example because the preservation was extraordinary, but Rome itself has portions of the great thermal complexes of Caracalla and Diocletian, now sitting below modern street grade. In Istanbul, Roman bath floors have been found buried under Ottoman construction. In London, in York, in Chester, every time a city with Roman foundations digs deep enough for modern infrastructure, it finds bathhouses below its own basement level. Everywhere the same story. The complex was there, then it was under. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The depth at which these structures keep appearing is not the depth of gradual accumulation. It's the depth of burial. The Roman baths sat sealed under bath for over 1,000 years. Nobody was looking for them. Nobody thought they were there. Renovation work in 1755 disturbed the ground and caught the edge of the complex. An excavation in 1878 began revealing its full scale. The city had been walking over a healing temple for 15 centuries without knowing it existed. And Bath is only the site we know about. Once you start mapping where these buried bath complexes keep appearing, you have to ask a question that mainstream archaeology doesn't seem particularly motivated to answer. How many mineral springs that ancient physicians specifically identified as therapeutically significant are still running right now, directly beneath modern city streets? Their properties unchanged, their locations forgotten, their medical significance completely ignored by the cities built directly over them. The ancients didn't build their healing temples randomly, they built them where the water carried something. Springs with sulfuric compounds, springs with specific mineral loads, springs that produced water the physicians observed doing something measurable to the human body across centuries of use. Those springs didn't disappear when the bathhouses closed. The water doesn't care about the fear that drove people away. It kept moving through the same ground, carrying the same mineral content, emerging at the same temperatures. Somewhere beneath European cities that grew from Roman foundations, that water is still moving, still carrying whatever the ancient physicians considered worth building temples to. We built our civilization directly on top of theirs and called it progress. We accepted the explanation, fear of plague, natural decline. The Romans fell and their infrastructure with them, and we never looked down. But the infrastructure didn't fall. It went underground. The healing temples are still there, sealed beneath cities that have forgotten they were ever built. And that should disturb us. Not because it's mysterious, because it's documented. We know the baths existed. We know they were buried. We know the springs are still running. We know ancient physicians attributed specific therapeutic effects to specific mineral waters and refined those observations over 2,000 years of practice. We know that knowledge was never formally recorded because it lived in the practice itself, in the daily use, in the complexes. When the complexes closed, the knowledge closed with them. Why would a civilization abandon 2,000 years of empirically observed medical practice based on an unverified suspicion? Why would that abandonment happen simultaneously across countries that otherwise couldn't agree on anything? Why would the physical structures be buried rather than preserved? Why is there so little interest in whether the mineral springs at known Roman bath sites still carry the properties the ancient physicians documented? Why do we keep finding these complexes under our cities and treat each discovery as a local curiosity rather than evidence of something systematic? And why, when you raise these questions, does the response amount to natural decline, unfortunate loss, the normal erosion of time? The springs are still running. Springs. They were running when the Romans built temples over them, running through every century of silence that followed, running now. The healing temples are down there, and we walk over them every day and never ask what we're standing on. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The burial wasn't accidental, the silence wasn't natural, and whatever was understood about that water, whatever knowledge 2,000 years of physicians built up through direct empirical observation, it didn't disappear. It went underground, waiting, like the springs themselves, for someone willing to look down.